hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, hello out there. Thanks for joining us tonight for the 3rd Annual People's Forest Forum. I'm Courtney Ray, I'm BARC's Associate Director, and I'm very pleased to introduce Karen Kitchen. Karen is an Indigenous educator and performer with the Osage Nation, and we are thrilled to have Karen here today to help open our program. I'll share more about Karen's work at the end, and I would love to make sure that you all can follow her work and her music. Karen, I can't find your face in the sea of faces. Oh, there you are.
I'm right below.
Hello.
I'm behind you. I'm right below you. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. As Courtney said, I'm a citizen of the Osage Nation of Oklahoma. I go home a couple times a year, but I've made my home in Portland now for, gosh, 35 years or longer. And I'm sort of retired. I retired from Portland Public Schools, where I was the director of the Indian Education Program for several years. And I'm having more time to do music, and I do a thing for Multnomah County Library once a month called Native Story Hour, which has been really, really fun. And for Native Heritage Month, I also did one for Ohio, and today I did one for Roseburg, which was really cool. So I was asked to share a song, and so in keeping with the amazing subject matter of this forum tonight, this song seems to make so much sense. It seems to be so appropriate. It's from the Mohawk Nation, and there's a musician named Teresa Bear Fox from the Mohawk Nation who put this song in Mohawk, which I don't do it in Mohawk, I'll do it in English. But it's based on a Thanksgiving address where the speaker would be showing gratitude for all the elements of life. And it's from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. This is part of their tradition, but I think you'll find it a nice way to set the tone for tonight in that spirit of gratitude for all the beautiful things that we find on Mount Hood. So there is a little chorus in Mohawk, and it translates to "It is beautiful." So here we go. Guayo yanale, 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 guayo yanale. We give thanks to the people and to Mother Earth. We give thanks to the waters and thanks to the fish. We give thanks to the fruits and thanks to the grass. So be it, our minds are together. Guayo yanale, 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 guayo yanale. We give thanks to the insects and thanks to the roots. We give thanks to the medicines and thanks to the foods. We give thanks to the animals and thanks to the trees. So be it, our minds are together. Kwayo yanale, 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 kwayo yanale. We give thanks to the thunder and thanks to the birds. We give thanks to the four winds and thanks to the stars. Elder brother, the sun, and our grandmother moon. So be it, our minds are together. Kwayo yanale, 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 kwayo yanale. We give thanks to the fire and thanks to the stones. We give thanks to the spirits and the four messengers. We give thanks to Creator for each precious gift. So be it, our minds are together. Kwayo yanale, 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 kwayo yanale.
Karen, thank you. So beautiful, and I feel like you've spoken for all the things we wanted to speak to tonight. Thank you for that.
Good. I hope to set the tone with spirit of gratitude and just, yeah, thankful to be in this circle with you all tonight.
We're honored to have you here. Here in the chat, I've put some more information about Karen's work, including where you can find her music. And as she mentioned, the Multnomah County Library program weekly on Wednesdays. Is it 10:30?
I'm sorry, it's only once a month. I wish.
Oh, once a month.
But it's once a month, yeah. The third Wednesday of every month.
So please, everyone, save that information out of the chat and spread that around, and you'll be able to find more of Karen's work there.
Thank you.
And Nikisha, I would love to bring you up now. Nikisha
Great.
Nathan, there she is.
Yes.
Executive Director.
Thanks, Courtney, and thank you so much, Karen, for joining us tonight and for sharing. My name is Nikisha Nathan. I'm the Executive Director of BARC, and I really appreciate everyone joining us tonight. Before we begin with tonight's program, I want to take some time to engage in BARC's practice of land acknowledgement. The slide that should be coming up here in just a second is wordy, but we're providing it in case you wish to read along with me. This is a practice that BARC has been developing to facilitate a deeper and more intentional process of questioning what it means to be people living on stolen land. As an organization founded by white people in the lineage of settler colonial environmentalism, BARC understands that our work has inherently existed within and is empowered by the white supremacist legacy of land theft and the erasure of Native authority over stolen lands referred to now as public lands of Mount Hood National Forest. As an advocacy organization, BARC maintains relationships with the agencies of the US federal government, which originally implemented the violence, land theft, colonization, and displacement of Indigenous people, including the creation of public lands, and which has not been corrected at this point. These actions have yet to be corrected. All non-native people have the privilege to access this land as a direct result of this legacy of violence and injustice. BARC's current staff, board of directors, and volunteers are working to transform the organization to first of all acknowledge all of our implicit participation in the ongoing displacement of Native people whenever we claim the benefits of this inherited legacy and these unearned privileges. I respectfully invite any Native people here today to have a few minutes now to speak freely about this.
I grew up here in the Portland urban Indian community. I'm a member of the Tlingit tribe. So, I recognize that I'm not one of the original inhabitants of this land. My cultural ways have always taught me, through my elders and through my community members, that I need to see myself as a visitor on the lands of those that have lived here since time immemorial, wherever I am, whether it's here in Portland or elsewhere. I think back to the Bolt decision up in Washington state that interpreted the treaties by saying that natives get 50% of the fish catch, and that we need access to our usual and accustomed grounds for hunting and gathering and fishing. I've applied that logic here in the urban area, that we need to uphold that responsibility as those benefiting from all of the resources of this land. And we need to make sure that we're upholding the vision of those that have lived here since time immemorial. So thank you so much for creating this space today, for including this land acknowledgement statement, and for your commitment to move forward the vision of the original inhabitants of this land.
Thank you, Carrie. Now, for all the non-Native people here tonight, I ask you to take the next 2 minutes to write some instructions, intentions, actions, and next steps for yourself, outlining how you will develop your practice of acknowledgement through action. If you've attended any recent BARC events, you should have what you wrote during those past events. Please get what you've written and revisit what you set out for yourself to do. How have you made your intentions concrete? Take this time to reflect on your efforts and update your intention and action plan. I'll set a 2-minute timer and start that timer now. Now, please set aside your journal, and turning your attention away from yourself, please join me in a moment of respectful silence, in contemplation and humility, in honor of the original people here tonight, across this continent, in the past, present, and in the future. Thank you all for supporting this important practice and learning. It is important that you continue to practice acknowledgement through action in all areas of your life. We hope that this practice has oriented you to our work for tonight's event, and we're glad to have you with us for Exploring Change, the People's Forest Forum. I'll take a brief moment to say a little bit about BARC. BARC is a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to transform Mount Hood National Forest into a place where natural processes prevail, where wildlife thrives, and where local communities have a social, cultural, and economic investment in its restoration and preservation. Since 1999, BARC has organized people from communities around Mount Hood National Forest to keep watch over the ecological conditions of the forest and the actions of the federal agency tasked with managing these public lands, the Forest Service. If you're interested in learning more about BARC's programs and volunteer opportunities, which include ground truthing, proposed timber sales, surveying wetlands and beaver habitat, and working on the Fremont Hood campaign, which Lizzie will tell us more about in just a minute, please visit BARC's website at www.bark-out.org for more information. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Bark for Mount Hood ! Lizzie will now continue and share more details about our Fremont Hood campaign.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really great. And keeping all of this in mind, I'm gonna give a brief introduction to what exactly is the Fremont Hood campaign. So my name's Lizzie Gaisley, and I've been a volunteer with BARC since the beginning of this summer, and I just kind of jumped straight into the Fremont Hood campaign. And on the Fremont Hood campaign, we're continuing BARC's work by advocating for the revision of the Mount Hood National Forest Plan. So to start, I'll just give a little background of what exactly is a forest plan and what's going on with the forest plan that we have for Mount Hood. So a forest management plan is basically the blueprint of how a forest will be managed. The plan divides the forest into different plots and delegates which activities can happen where. So everything from recreation to commercial timber sales is decided on the forest management plan. And the management plan that we have today was drafted and put into place in 1999, and there haven't been any significant revisions to the plan since. And the National Forest Management Act of 1967 requires that a forest plan is to be revised at least every 15 years. So we're a little behind. And as a result, not only does our forest plan fail to include 30 years of scientific knowledge, but it still embodies the Forest Service's outdated values. As a branch of the federal government, the Forest Service is part of the Department of Agriculture, which means that our Forest Service ultimately values the forest for its commercial timber stocks as an agricultural crop. And the forest plan no longer aligns with the needs of our communities and BARC's vision for a free Mount Hood. So as 2020 continues to show us, this year has been increasingly difficult, and we've witnessed the firsthand challenges of many of Mount Hood National Forests will continue to face in the coming years, and especially with the changing climate. As the climate crisis continues and the past 30 years of science have brought to light new knowledge that make it more clear than ever that the current forest plan needs to change. So in response to the Forest Service's inaction and neglect to revise the forest plan since 1999, BARC has drafted a need to change document, which is a legal document that identifies what parts of the forest management plan need to change and how to change it. This document has been drafted by our incredible BARC staff, and you'll hear more about that later. And the need to change document highlights the most important issues such as recreation, water, fire management, environmental justice, and endangered species. And the Free Mount Hood campaign aims to make the Mount Hood National Forest Plan a 21st century model of public forest management, which emphasizes these important issues and the ecological resilience of our national forest. And so now you're going to hear some presentations that the Free Mount Hood campaign has put together on the ecological issues that are in need of better management strategies.
Thanks, Lizzie. Here goes the first of our presentations.
As the climate changes, so will seasonal weather patterns. In the mountainous, temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, the movement of water defines the seasons as we now know them. Think of the forest as a vast, complex reservoir, not just the waters behind the concrete dams on the Clackamas, Bull Run, and other drinking watersheds, but all of the water being held by the land itself. 98% of this area provides drinking water. Ancient glaciers and deep, long-lasting snowpack are quintessential features of this landscape, but we already know that Mount Hood's glaciers have shrunk by 35% since the early 1900s. The latest climate projections describe equally dramatic changes in precipitation patterns for the next century. More rain than snow in the winter, earlier snowmelt, and deeper summer drought. Warm winter rains and earlier snowmelt will move water downstream earlier in the year and more rapidly, leaving less water in streams and wetland meadows during the summer drought. Management needs to consider how to maintain water quantity given the loss of glaciers and snowpack. Low water levels, warm water temperatures, and longer drought will impact many species as well as drinking water sources. Portland's drinking water comes from the Bull Run Reservoir, protected from commercial logging through an act of Congress. However, many communities draw their drinking water from other areas of the forest which don't have the same level of protection. The unprotected Clackamas River watershed provides drinking water to over 300,000 people, and communities in Hood River and Wasco County draw water from Dog River, Mill Creek, 15 Mile Creek, and other sources. On the east side, only Mill Creek is managed primarily for water quality. Every community deserves clean, reliable drinking water. The forest plan should be updated to designate every drinking watershed and set priorities around water quantity and water quality. As we lose our deep water storage in glaciers and snowpack, forest management needs to incorporate strategies for increasing water storage across the landscape. Only when we recognize the whole of the forest as a reservoir can we design management to protect every drop.
So you've heard about water, and now I'll invite Diane to share your presentation on wildlife.
I'm Diane, and I'm a Portland artist, and I just was extending my thanks for everyone being here this evening. And in 2013, I backpacked on Mount Hood with other artists and learned of Bark's advocacy work. My relationship to the mountain and organization grew over the next years, and I embarked on a complex sculptural artist book project titled Ode to the Mountain that will be completed in 2021. The images I'm sharing are from that project. Intended outcomes are to cultivate knowing a place deeply, weave Indigenous stories that share interdependence, reciprocity, and cooperation, display animal drawings that highlight keystone species and diverse ecosystems, build community, and turn our love for the mountain into action, where we demand a new management plan from the Mount Hood National Forest Service that prioritizes climate resilience. All wildlife species will be affected by climate change as the effect of change in temperature and moisture propagate through the region's ecosystems. There will be winners and losers. An important part of the Pacific Northwest ecosystem is fire. Since white settlers started managing the forest, wildfires have been suppressed. With fire comes rebirth. The outdated Forest Service plan doesn't include wolves, a keystone species that stabilizes the overall landscape and native biodiversity. One of the benefits of protecting wolves is they prey on deer and elk, which keep their herds vigorous because they go after weak and diseased. In addition, their carcasses redistribute nutrients and provide food for other wildlife species, like bears and scavengers. Deer and elk need to be kept on the move, otherwise they overgraze. When this happens near a stream, it causes erosion, increasing sedimentation, which is one of the leading causes of stream degradation in the Pacific Northwest. The restored willow and aspen near the stream bed banks will create habitat for native birds, fish, beaver, and other species. Historically, beaver-created wetlands were common throughout the area that is now Mount Hood National Forest. However, by the end of 19th century, few survived due to European trade. Beaver activity creates productive and complex slow water habitats for fish, helps moderate both base flows and peak flows, traps sediment and nutrients, and helps maintain riparian hardwood plant communities. The 1990 Forest Plan provides no direction on managing this other keystone species, the beaver, or their habitat. Beaver engineer watersheds by maintaining the structure of the surrounding ecological community. Their presence affects not only the types and numbers of many terrestrial and aquatic plant and animal species, but also maintains the change over time of channel form and the hydrology of watersheds. Reintroducing and managing beavers in Mount Hood National Forest would directly benefit other sensitive and ESA listed species such as the Oregon spotted frog. The Oregon spotted frog uses perennial wetland habitats as well as pools, ponds, and small floodplain wetlands associated with permanent bodies of water. Salmon recovery plans along the Pacific coast have recently identified that beaver habitat are as important for salmon and steelhead as they are for beaver. Reduced summer stream flows have lower water quality and warmer temperatures, which will compromise the survivorship of juvenile fish, and the beaver flows may prevent spawning salmon from entering some smaller streams. I want to see the Forest Service include wolves and salmon as essential for our forest's future.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
And now I'll invite Isabel to talk to us about forest carbon.
Hi, everybody. I'm Isabel. I'm going to talk a little bit about carbon storage in the Mount Hood National Forest. So oftentimes, when we think about carbon storage and climate change, we see charts like this, which are both very important and also very scary. This is a graph of atmospheric carbon dioxide measured in parts per million and the number of years before the present below. So as you can see, there has always been some pretty significant variations. Carbon's always kind of going up and down between ice ages and warm periods until we hit an industrialized society. And so I'm here to talk about the fact that forests are more than just a place to escape our climate anxiety. They're the central and most important land-based carbon regulating system in the world, second only to oceans in their total carbon absorbing abilities. And in fact, 9 out of the top 10 carbon storing national forests are in Oregon and Washington, with Mount Hood sitting at number 6, which I think is a little unfair given how big the Willamette National Forest is. And that is even considering our current rules, which are very focused on extraction and logging. And carbon storage is not mentioned anywhere in the Mount Hood National Forest Plan. If carbon storage were to be a management priority, it is estimated that our forests could absorb twice as much as they currently do. If only logging were to be ceased on federal lands, carbon stocks could be increased by 1/3 in about 5 decades. So where actually is all this carbon storage? The majority of it is underground in the form of soil organic carbon. Second to that is the above ground biomass. So that's when you go into the forest and you see all the trees and all the green stuff and everything growing around you. And then in the kind of middle section is below ground biomass, dead wood, and forest floor litter. So below ground biomass is all the root systems, anything that is living and below ground. Dead wood actually stores carbon, it just kind of sits there. And the same with forest floor litter. So that's all the pine needles, all the leaf litter, all the stuff that kind of bounces when you walk on forest stuff. But what does that actually look like when you walk out into a forest? The first and most obvious, like I said, is growth. All living things need carbon to grow, and forests are constantly moving and changing and growing. The process of turning sunlight and CO2 into sugars is what plants do best. It's how they make more of themselves. It's how they become all that underbrush that hits you in the face when you're out trying to find some huckleberries. And it's the huckleberries. So saplings shoot up really quickly, and their paths quickly, and paths get overgrown if you don't keep it up. And as trees get bigger, their capacity for storing carbon also increases. By the time they reach the size of the tree on the left, they are carbon storing machines. The scale in this graph on the right is a little bit challenging, but the total size of the tree is measured in tons on the bottom, with the amount of the rate of growth on the left, and that's directly related to how much carbon they're storing, since trees are mostly made of cellulose. So this is an exponential relationship, essentially. As the trees, as they get bigger and bigger, can pack more and more on every year that they grow. But what happens when a tree falls in a forest? This happens every year. Trees go down, some get blown over, some just die, but do they release all that carbon that they had been storing? Some of it decomposes pretty rapidly, but the majority of it just kind of sits there for a while, becoming really good habitat for animals, as you can see on the left in snags. They also become prime habitat for mushrooms, such as the scalypholiota and the turkey tail seen on the log on the left. These are some very lovely looking saprotrophs that you can see pretty much anywhere. And these are in the process of moving that carbon that was just sitting on the ground back into the ground, transporting it into soil organic carbon and moving it through mycelial networks to provide the basis of new growth. These transport networks reuse and rearrange the nutrients in the downed wood, storing them and letting them be used in new places. So this soil organic carbon is quickly reused to feed new growth. It doesn't just sit there, it doesn't get re-released back into the atmosphere unless someone goes out there and disturbs it, like with a tractor. So on the right, we can see this principle of rebirth and regrowth in the form of a nurse log. Nutrients are rarely left to just sit. There's always something that's looking for a way up and a way to grow in the form of a nurse log. On the left, we can see a flash of fireweed, which pioneers new soils fresh after a fire and gets them ready for further stages of growth. Carbon moves through everything we see in a forest, trading it from one form to another on a huge variety of scale, interacting with animals and other plants in ways that we're still currently trying to understand, even as that understanding has grown in the last centuries and decades. So the next time you go out on the mountain, I want you to look for these processes because they're happening constantly. There are processes occurring in the forest that we cannot plan for. Our forests, particularly our old growth forests, are unique ecosystems that are more than capable of addressing our climate crisis than any sort of carbon capture technology we have available. This capacity is not planned or accounted for in the current Mount Hood National Forest Plan. We need a plan that acknowledges these processes and values them for what they are and all the benefits that they provide without active management. Integrating carbon storage into the forest plan does not preclude any other goal and truly allows the forest to be all that it can be.
Thank you, Isabel. And we have one final short presentation for you from Genevieve.
Hi, I'm Genevieve, and I'm going to take us from carbon to fire. Many years back, fire danced over mountains, dipped through valleys, and skirted along this rough-edged section of forest. Fires have always been a part of the landscape here, weather-driven and also human-driven. One of the earliest fires documented was the Columbia Burn of 1902, but indigenous fire use dates back much further as a form of land management. Fire is present and persistent. These days, its effects, unfortunately, often catastrophic. The Riverside Fire just months past, one of many, all at once, sending smoke across the continent. The mosaic burn pattern of the Riverside Fire shows the levels of vegetation loss, from blues untouched to reds, scorched at high intensity. Here, fire is stoked by hot eastern winds and lightning, fed by dry and abundant fuel, and also, mostly, by humans. The field of fire ecology offers insightful perspectives on fire's essential role in the forest. Scientists now recognize that plant and animal communities have adapted to tolerate and even benefit from fire. The burn lays way for vegetation succession. A mixture of openings, partial openings, and full canopy openings create diverse habitats for plants and wildlife, which continue to change as they grow over time. Fire removes low-growing underbrush. It cleans the forest floor of debris and opens it up to sunlight. This reduces competition for sunlight and nutrients and allows established trees to grow stronger and healthier. Fire also kills diseases and insects that prey on trees and provides valuable nutrients that enrich the soil. More trees die each year from insect infestation and disease than they do from fire. In our forests, there are many familiar plants that benefit from fire. They're fire adaptive and maybe even fire dependent. After a fire has burned through and nitrogen is sparse, lupin and grasses spring up. They're prepared with their own stores underground. Billowy white snowbrush produces seeds opened by fire. Red alder and western larch rely on fire to clear the canopy. And lodgepole pines make cones sealed tight with resin that only open under the heat of a wildfire, sending their precious seeds out on smoke-tinged winds. Early Forest Service policy was shaped by logging interests. Beginning in the 1920s, it had two goals: to prevent fires from starting and to suppress them as quickly as possible. The Forest Service opposed intentional burning, even though forests had co-evolved with indigenous fire for thousands of years, as we mentioned earlier. In old panoramas, the effects of both logging and fires are apparent: stumps, felled trees, and clearings. Oregon used to have hundreds of fire lookouts perched on mountaintops. Every summer, people were actually hired to sit and watch for fire and then to put it out. Even the 1990 Mount Hood Forest Plan is silent about the important role of fire in maintaining forest health. Fire is still treated as a solely destructive force, one to be suppressed and eliminated. Meanwhile, the factors that contribute to fire are more powerful than ever. And our contemporary world is not fire adapted, with urbanization, population increases, monoculture, logging, longer fire seasons, and extreme weather from climate change. So if we cannot stop the fires, how can we adapt and prepare? Shifting the focus from suppression to preparedness requires changing our approach. This is why BARC is working to update the forest plan. Instead of simply fighting fires, we need to learn to work with them. We need alternative strategies and tactics that maximize the benefits of burning while minimizing potential adverse effects. And we need a more strategic and selective approach for fire suppression. This includes protecting front country communities that can't tolerate fire and using controlled fire in backcountry wildlands. As fire regimes shift over time, fires filter for species adapted to changing fire and climate conditions. Promoting more wildfire away from people and prescribed fires near forested communities are both important steps towards improving the adaptive resilience of ecosystems and society.
Thank you, Genevieve. Now let me invite our staff attorney, Brenna Bell, to take over for a moment to do a Q&A.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. That was so cool. All the presentations were just amazing and prepared by BARC volunteers who have astonishing artistic abilities and a lot of good information about this. So my role right now for about the next 5 minutes is kind of to be BARC's Wikipedia. If you had questions about any of those presentations, I get to answer them. And since there are so many of us, I think the easiest thing to do is if you put your question in the chat, then I'll be able to see it because I can't see all of the hands. So if you have any clarifying questions about the forest plan or any of the major topics, throw them at me. And if not, we're going to break out into small groups soon where we get to talk about more of this stuff in depth, but I'll wait for a moment and see what comes up in the chat. Oh, great question. How receptive do you think the Forest Service will be to including carbon storage in the new plan? Well, luckily, there were new regulations. So there's a law called the National Forest Management Act, which is the act that requires forests to go through planning. And after many failed attempts in 2012, the federal government approved new planning regulations. And those planning regulations require the Forest Service to look at carbon storage and climate change impacts when they are revising or amending the forest plans. So happily, it's not really up to the Forest Service. How well they do it is a question, but they are specifically required by the new planning regulations when they do update the plan to look at carbon storage and climate change impacts. So we've got those good planning regulations on our side. All right, there's a couple more questions now popping up. Okay, what's the latest from the regional office is when they plan to do the updates? Well, the latest news is probably not still for a while. And when they do start doing the plans, doing them from the southern part of the Northwest Forest Plan area, the range of the spotted owl, which we're included in, there's 18 national forests, and then clumping them and moving up the Cascades from Northern California and Southern Oregon up. But one of the things that BARC is pushing for is the fact that the Forest Service can actually amend the plan before it does a whole revision. And it's a much, much easier thing to do to amend the plan. So they could amend it to talk about carbon storage and climate change right now without having to revise the entire plan. And so we're hoping maybe with a better administration and more political traction to get them to do this. Next question from Mia. Will you share this with the group, my conversation with my New Orleans friends about fire versus hurricane prevention? Yeah, that's something I shared at our presentation about the Riverside fire last Tuesday, I guess 2 days ago, some of you were on. And Genevieve really talked about this, the shift from prevention to preparation. And it's something that came home a lot for me this year when I was talking to good friends of mine in New Orleans during the fires. They called to check on me. And we got into a long conversation about the difference between fires and hurricanes. And that in New Orleans, everyone knows that they're going to be hurricanes. So they prepare for the hurricanes, they plan ahead. And in Oregon, we still every year get shocked by the fact that there are fires and react like it's an unknowable and unpreparable crises. And how we really need to start shifting to thinking of them as big fires as weather events, just like other people think of hurricanes, because we can plan for them. They're still going to do damage, right? Those hurricanes still batter the people in New Orleans, but because they're ready for them, they're able to prepare more. So making that shift in consciousness to thinking about fire as a weather event rather than something that we can control is going to be necessary for us to change things around that. All right, the next question. Oh, would moving the Forest Service to the Department of Interior be helpful in terms of changing its mission? That is a fantastic question. One that many people have talked about for years. And, like just this week, we saw the new proposal for a Secretary of Interior being Deb Haaglund, who would be the first Indigenous person ever to head the Department of Interior, which is thrilling. And I think most people, when they really look at that question, think the answer is yes. Yes, if we could move the Forest Service to where all of the other land management agencies were in Department of Interior, I think that would shift it from being seen as trees as crops, which is how it was created, to land as, I don't really want to use the word resource, but, you know, land as ally, can we say? And I think that that would be a shift. Even in the last administration, people were talking about this. It's a live question, but I think it would take a movement, and that movement doesn't exactly exist yet. All right, going down through the questions. These are great questions. Oh, the question below is almost, you know, right on point for that. If you go back to the Forest Service's beginning in their 1905 use book, which kind of launched it, it was very much about forest as product. It was about timber or trees for timber. It was about water for irrigation. And that still underlies things. So I think that there needs to be a general shift in the entire mission of the organization. One thing we also really want to get rid of is timber targets. So currently, every national forest is told you have to produce this much timber, or BLM districts, which are in Department of Interior, but are more timber crazed than almost anyone. So just shifting to the Department of Interior won't necessarily solve things, but getting rid of those targets would be huge, because the budget is tied to timber production currently. Like performance reviews for Forest Service employees are tied to timber outputs. And as long as they have those drivers, I mean, if the forest plan sets timber outputs, then I think it'll be very hard to shift. So basically at every level of the organization, it needs to shift from timber output to a conservation ethic and that allyship ethic. Let's see, is that how are we doing on time? Just running through all your questions.
Take one more.
Okay. Well, actually, the last one I think is Russ answering a question. So I think we're good on that. Oh, yeah, Visalik, ooh, that's a problem. Unfortunately, Joe Biden has nominated Tom Visalik, who was the Secretary of Ag under Obama, and not great for forests, not at all. So I think we have an uphill fight with this administration, certainly not as uphill as the last one. But the entrenched culture of the Forest Service as for trees as crops is real deep. And so since, you know, Bark kind of started thinking like, how can we stop just fighting timber sale by timber sale by timber sale, which is why we've created the Free Mount Hood campaign to change the overall management plan. But people now nationally are also thinking, how can we stop working forest by forest by forest? We need to shift the ethic of the entire agency. And I think that's really going to be the direction of the next big push of land activism, is starting to look at, you know, the importance of land as a mitigating factor for climate change, almost more than anything else. And I think that's where we will see this shift if it does. So there's Brenna the Bark Wikipedia answering what you got for me. And now we're coming to the exciting time where you all get to start talking. And I want to encourage you to grab your thing. In the invitation, it asked you to bring something that represented your intentions or your hopes for Mount Hood in the future. So I believe that we are going to be broken up into small groups. Each of them will have a facilitator and a note taker. And you'll be able to talk about that special thing. And then we'll be all coming back together soon. But I'm so glad you can all be here with us tonight.
So go ahead and join your breakout room. Note taker, I have sent you a link to your notes doc. Please open that up and we will see you in about half an hour. Thanks for that, Michael. And I hope everybody's back. If you're back, go ahead, turn your video back on so I can see how many folks are back. And Nikisha, are you around? We're gonna hear back from each of the groups. So I'll be taking the notes for Nikisha, who will facilitate this part.
Yes, so is everyone here, it looks like? looks like for the most part. Let's go ahead and we can just make it easy and go in order. Then that way folks know which order they're going in. So we can start with breakout group 1 all the way through breakout group 8. There were 8 of us, right, Courtney?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great. And so if everybody who's reporting back can take 2 minutes, then we should be able to get through and in a great, perfect amount of time. So
I could just share really briefly since we have limited time. I think one really important thing that our group talked about was how it's important to include all voices when we're approaching transformative change and trying to revise the Mount Hood National Forest Plan. And we also talked a lot about how it's so important to bring in an educational aspect and allow people to, not allow people to understand, but to make the connections that to make the connections with everyone that we're all connected to the forest in one way or another, from urban to rural residents of Oregon, we're all connected to the Mount Hood National Forest in one way or another. And that's often something that we don't all grow up learning. We don't all grow up with equal access to Mount Hood for recreational use, and we don't all connect to Mount Hood in the same way. And so that was something that we talked about a lot. And also we talked a lot about language and how we talk about Mount Hood in this sort of manifest destiny way, or we look at Mount Hood as a resource, and just how that's important to keep in mind and kind of constantly combating that kind of language and viewing Mount Hood not only as a resource, but for all the different ways that we interact with the mountain on an everyday basis. Sorry, I was kind of rambling at the end there, but.
that was great. Thank you. Quick check with Courtney. Were you able to track that and hear everything okay? Since you're taking notes?
Yes, yes.
Great. Let's move on to group 3. The facilitator, there's Isabel, and I know Justice was taking notes. Do y'all have a reporter?
We started off talking about how a lot of the value that the group saw from the forest came from the fact that it's a place that kind of shows a different values system than what we usually encounter. So focusing on cooperation and growth as instead of consumption. And then as we were discussing values and the Forest Service values, we kind of discussed quite a bit about the fact that in order to change the Forest Service, it's not just laws you have to change, it's additionally pretty wide divides between people who are focused on logging and people who are focused more on preservation or conservation. And so trying to understand how to bridge those divides between different understandings of what a forest is, and how we can kind of bring people more into an understanding of a forest as not just a crop, but also not just a recreation place, and understanding that all of the various benefits that we get are also a part of the forest ecosystem as a whole.
All right, great. Thanks. 20 seconds to spare. How about Lloyd's group?
So I am going to recap for our group. I would like to mention that our group brought lichen, bears, a painting of Trillium Lake, mushrooms, a disco ball, a hiking book, and a glass of water as representatives of the forest. And we talked about creating an oversight board that includes at least 50% Native peoples, We also talked a lot about having a forward thinking and forward looking plan, and viewing the ways that we use and advocate for the forest through that lens of what things are going to look like generations down. We talked about climate change and water, about extending, as mentioned earlier, outreach to larger communities. That might mean a different demographic. It might also mean a not just recreational based community, because a lot of the community that often accesses and is vocal about Mount Hood is has that relationship through recreation, while at the same time, people throughout the entire state of Oregon actually do have relationships with Mount Hood. And we also talked about potentially reaching out to more outdoors schools and educational institutions. And I think that wraps up the main points.
Fantastic. All right, so room 5, Mia. Is your group ready to go?
Well, I was just asking who would like to be a report back, and then we got kicked out of the room. So if someone from my group was just about to say, oh, I want to, then jump in and cut me off. Otherwise, I will proceed trying to represent what our group was talking about. Some of the qualities that we were describing in the objects and images that we brought that to represent our interest in the issue of forest management. Some of those qualities that were common to many of us were gratitude and acknowledging our dependence and interdependence on the ecosystems of the forest, our connectedness, and the connectedness of all of the organisms in these ecosystems, and then our feelings of obligation and of mutual reciprocity toward sustaining the forest that sustains us. In the question about the values and goals of that we how to get values and goals represented in a new forest management plan. The group was identifying the need to include and to center Indigenous voices and Indigenous knowledge and practices and wisdom, to include and to make connections with underrepresented groups of people who might not have the awareness of how much we are dependent on the forest, and so to bring more people and more communities into knowing their own connectedness to the forest, so that their voices get to be part of setting those values and goals, and also having a baseline ecological data to start with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia. Great. Okay, so room 6, Daniela's group.
I'll do my best to represent what was discussed in the room. So for objects, we had a nice array too: a glass of water, a stuffed beaver, a wooden postcard of Mount Hood, camouflage, which was a nice metaphor for understanding ourselves as part of the forest ecosystem, water, a woven circle. So we touched on the importance of drinking water and that coming directly from Mount Hood National Forest. And going into the second question, we also identified the value framework from which the current management plan came from, essentially white settlers coming to this place and perceiving of what they saw as an untouched wilderness rather than a carefully managed landscape by Indigenous folks. And then the capitalists and industrialists coming in and having dollar signs for eyeballs when they were looking at trees, and basically thinking about such a short-term vision of extraction and profit. It also came up just how generally unhelpful the short-term vision is, and the concept of 7 generations came up, what it would look like to manage forests for not just the present moment and us currently on the planet, but for future generations. Paper also came up as a necessary resource and how that might look differently in the future if we are not logging for timber.
Let's go ahead and hear from Courtney's group.
Mary Baumgartner, and I'm going to speak for our group. Can you hear me okay? Sometimes my audio isn't working.
We can hear you great.
Okay, so I don't remember everyone's objects, but I know at least we had a beaver and a wolf represented. We talked a lot about how important the forest is for mental health and restorative aspects of nature for everyone to be able to enjoy, and that as far as changing from an kind of an archaic framing of the agricultural use and extractive use of forests to a more broad shared vision will have to include more people, more voices than were utilized for the plan that's to make the plan that's currently being used, and that's going to take education and outreach and a community process to arrive at. And if any, that's kind of pretty much all I can think of. Everyone else, I mean, echoed 2 similar thoughts also about needing Indigenous voices to be represented, and also resilience for the climate change.
Let's go ahead and hear from Group A. That is Julie, and Julie's reporting back. So thanks for doing that, Julie.
Great. Yeah, totally. So yeah, we had a great little cozy group, a lot of storytelling for our show and tell, which was awesome. A lot of people emphasized like visuals and beauty. We had some artists in the group who took some really good photos and who do paintings of Mount Hood. In addition to the artistic kind of values, there was also a lot of things about, going to Mount Hood with loved ones who are visiting or who are friends or family. So it was really great to kind of hear how Mount Hood stands out as very unique, compared to where our loved ones are from, or, compared to where we're from. So a lot of value for like the uniqueness of Mount Hood as well. That came through in the show and tell. And then for the second question, definitely, I know a lot of people have emphasized a lot of things we also talked about. I especially like that Daniela said that like people approaching the value of the forest with dollar signs in their eyeballs. I think that in as many words came up in our group as well, and definitely was happening in a context of stolen and occupied lands. So that when it came to process, we had it was very complicated and we didn't have any easy answers, but we did know there should be emphasis on frontline communities, which has a couple different meanings, whether that means proximity, people who are spending the most time out there, but also even if people are geographically further from Mount Hood, still bearing the brunt of impacts of, things like climate change, impacts to drinking water, forest fire, smoke, all those kinds of things. So frontline communities is a very dynamic term. And we just knew that, yeah, everyone needs to be involved in the forest plan establishment, but that's good to focus there, especially from people who are facing the most dynamic impacts. All right, 30 seconds. So the third one, we talked a lot about how it was kind of funny because our group had a few BARC staff members. So it's also like, oh yeah, we do need to dig in deeper to this question rather than just saying we work at BARC. But there was some great spiritual connections that people in our group have, as well as just our personal networks. We're excited to talk to people more about this work. And yeah, like we said, this is something that impacts all of us and all of our health. So good to reach out to anyone and everyone.
Let's see if we can loop back around to Mallory, I think.
Mallory dropped some updates in the chat there from their group, and so I grabbed those for the notes. We only have, or actually we're getting to the end of our time right now, so hang out for just a moment. I want to invite you all to take part in a quick poll that one of our volunteers put forward. Tanya, you can throw up the poll. Of these options, what do you think would be a good mascot for the new forest plan? If you have another mascot idea in mind, put that in the chat, please. And while folks are doing that, I want to thank all the volunteers of the Fremont Hood Committee and the staff at BARC for supporting our work and getting this event together. Thank you to all the artists who submitted work for that opening video. The music was by Danny Cairns. Thank you, Danny. Phil Smith, Melissa Smith, Graham Hilbert, Ori, Caro, Cascadia Wild art was featured. Yoon Hwan's art, Lauren Blair. One of my photos was in there. And oh, now I can't see anything. What else? Who else? Mike Hoderman's photos were in there. Russ, thank you for sending your photos. Patrick Dunn, Audie, and Simran for your painting and all of your artwork. Thank you so much. And a huge thank you to Karen Kitchen for your song. I don't know if Karen's still here. And please, folks, scroll up in the chat and grab the information about Karen's CDs and her work. And just thank you to everybody for coming out tonight or staying in with us and sharing your thoughts. We're going to be following up with a survey. Hopefully you can share some of your thoughts tonight or first thing in the morning about what you found useful about this event and some of your ideas for the future. Nikki, do you want to say anything more about the survey?
I'm about to drop it in the chat right now. We would love to hear from you all. We have some other events that we are planning in the future. And so your feedback on this event will really help us do even better next time. So I'm going to drop it in the chat in just a few seconds. Please feel free to fill it out for us. And thank you.
So where's the poll at? Tanya, what kind of results are we seeing? You're muted if you're talking. Oh, there it is. Beaver in the lead, no surprise. So you'll be seeing more beaver work. We might have to incorporate some more beaver work into the campaign. There's Bucky the beaver on Lloyd's screen. So we already have a mascot. We're ready to go. So thank you again, everybody. Give yourselves a round of applause. And we really appreciate you spending your time with us tonight. If you aren't already on BARC's mailing list, you can find us at our website, and we will put the websites and Facebook handles and things in the chat for you too. We'll send the survey to everyone who was registered for the event. So don't worry if some of your friends were here before and had to leave early, they'll get it. I see a nice leather stitched, Mia's got a nice leather stitched beaver emblem. We're always happy to feature the artwork and artisanship of folks in the world around us. So if you have something you'd like to contribute or that you'd like us to promote that has anything to do with beavers, we'll definitely do it. I can open it just for if there's any closing remarks any staff want to make or committee members. And thank you all. And well, you're free to wander away from this virtual space. But we really appreciate it, and you'll be hearing from us more. Take care, and we'll see you in the new year.